And also, Colin, thank you very much for your devoted service to the Tufts Institute of the Environment. Colin is one of the co-directors of that institute, and it's been a privilege to work with him in that capacity, among others. The Provost office is something at Tufts University as opposed to in any one of our schools. So, for instance, I can point out that this includes the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine, and the De-Stressing Dogs have a lot to do with them. The Pause for People program is hosted by the Cummings School, as is the Tufts Institute for Human-Animal Interaction, a nice umbrella for it. My home is actually downhill. I'm originally a professor of mathematics in the School of Arts and Sciences. Among my qualifications is that I was also at Tufts at the time of the signing of the Talloires Declaration. So age is one reason that I'm standing up here. And it's a great privilege to introduce a speaker who has crossed not only Packard Avenue to come here, but also the Connecticut River. Bill Moomaw comes at this time to us from Williams College, which is his alma mater, and also to which he has returned on the topic of sustainability, which is very much pertinent to what we do now. His house is a net zero energy house that he built in Williamstown. This is quite remarkable. I might add to that that Williams College itself is embarking on an interesting project. Actually, it's underway already. They renovated a historic building to become as energy efficient as this kind of new construction can be. That's entirely unprecedented. And they have, as of last month, started measuring the energy in and out to ensure that over a 12-month period, they really are zero energy. So Bill Moomaw, with his Tufts footprint as well as his Williams footprint, is very much about sustainability. His footprint is actually global. So again, from this perspective, the other side of Packard Avenue used to be very far away. Happily, it's not that way anymore. His faculty appointment at Tufts is in the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and it's remarkable that by training, he's a physical chemist. Not too many of those at the Fletcher School. It says a lot about Bill Moomaw. To nobody's surprise, right? How many chemists do you expect to find at the Fletcher School? His undergrad degree, like I mentioned, is from Williams. His graduate degree is from what I like to call the Caltech of the East, MIT, a few stops down the road. And in addition to having been on the faculty at the Fletcher School, he is also the founding director of the Center for International Environment and Resource Policy, which is still alive and well in the hands of Kelly Sims Gallagher, another great friend of the Tufts Institute for the Environment, as well as the Tufts Climate Initiative. And so he is, in fact, also the father or grandfather, depending on your take, of the Tufts Institute for Environment, which, again, does many great things, including supplying the food for this event in the category of food for thought. Among the things that give Bill Moomaw a remarkable global impact is he is among the authors of several of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, and that makes him a Nobel laureate as well. A fractional Nobel laureate maybe because he shares it with 3,000 others, but this is a very distinct club of 3,000 people who made a real difference. And his interest in climate and the environment goes not only back to the founding of the institutes here at Tufts, this authoring of these reports, but also way back when another topic was on the forefront, he was involved in getting CFCs banned and thereby addressing issues of the ozone layer. So there's not just a single track hobby here, but rather a sustained attention to sustainability in Bill Moomaw's career. So it's an exceptional privilege to welcome him here as somebody with a global footprint, a long-standing Tufts affiliation, and a commitment to sustainability that is reflected very much in the Talloires Declaration. And we're celebrating with this year's anniversary of this declaration, the thing itself, our attention to sustainability, the initiative that Tufts University took in getting this declaration on the books. And therefore, I'm happy to welcome our speaker. I will allow myself one small digression. I've on numerous occasions gotten fairly close to Talloires, never quite made it there. For those of you who haven't gotten there yet and have an inclination to also the arts, there is at this time in the Sackler building of our medical school an exhibit by one of our own faculty members, Dan Jay, who is a practicing artist, of pictures that he painted while in Talloires using dyes and materials that were familiar to the chemist Berthelot, who comes from Talloires. So Dan Jay from our Sackler School of Graduate Biomedical Sciences is combining his science insights into materials, chemistry, and the like. He was a scholar in residence in Talloires and started painting there. And it's a beautiful collection of paintings that you see. He has a whole series on images of Talloires that start with something that looks like this, except painted with 1800s colors, to abstract renditions of this in which in the end you still recognize bits and pieces. 6th floor of the Sackler building. Again, the Provost office works with the entire university, and one of my privileges to learn about things that go on off this hill. Again, that was not a digression. I do not mean to detract any further from the main attraction for the day. It's a tremendous privilege to have Bill Moomaw among us to celebrate the anniversary of the Talloires Declaration. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Boris. Get this on, right? Maybe. Yeah. Wrong-sized ears, I guess. I don't know. Thank you very much, Boris, for that kind introduction. I really have spent most of my sustainability career here at Tufts University, and it's been a great privilege to be able to do so. And when I was asked by various people if I would do a 25-year reminiscence on the Talloires Declaration, I was delighted to do so. But I'm always reminded when I'm asked to do things like that, I go home and I say to my wife, guess what? She says, what? I'm history. So anyway, I'd like to share some of this history with you, not only about the Talloires Declaration, but what's happened since at Tufts. So in October 1990, President Jean Mayer convened 22 university presidents and chancellors at the Tufts European Center. Here's a picture of the plaque outside of the center in Talloires, France, to commit to including environment into teaching, research, and campus operations. And those are kind of the three legs on which this declaration stands. And in the report that accompanies it, there's this statement which I feel really sums it up. Universities educate most of the people who develop and manage society's institutions. For this reason, universities bear profound responsibilities to increase the awareness, knowledge, technologies, and tools to create an environmentally sustainable future. I think that's pretty good. I know it was written by a committee or by Jean Mayer or by whom, but it's a really good statement. And put this in historical context. This is 1990. So our common future had just come out, the Brundtland report about sustainable development in 1987. There was planning for the Rio summit in 1992, but hadn't happened yet. So we were really ahead of the curve here at Tufts. And just, you know, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but you have it in front of you in micro print, I see, if you can read things that small. But just a couple of the things here. Raise public, government, industry, foundation, university awareness about the environment and sustainability. Create an institutional culture of sustainability. The institution must have that, you know, kind of embedded in its spirit, in its soul, in its being. Educate for environmentally responsible citizenry. Foster environmental literacy for all. Reach out beyond the university. Practice institutional ecology. How do we operate ourselves here? We are contributing. We have a big carbon footprint. We have a big water footprint. We have all, you know, we use paper. We use all these kinds of things. How can we address that? Involve all stakeholders. That is, we should work with governments, we should work with corporations, we should work with foundations, we should work with NGOs, with everybody who's in this area, the general public, our local community, Medford and Somerville, which we've done. I'll say something about that in a moment. Collaborate for interdisciplinary approaches. This was a radical statement for a university at this time. Universities have been organized for 150 years on Hegelian principles of where knowledge belongs. It belongs in the math department, it belongs in the chemistry department, it belongs in the history department, the economics department. And you don't get any points for talking to those other folks in those other departments. So this was a pretty radical statement to be making. And Tufts, one of the things that really attracted me to Tufts was when I was interviewed for my first position at the Center for Environmental Management, I met various people who were on the search team, and there was an engineer, someone in the Department of Civil Environmental Engineering, who was a public health person, David Goot. I said, boy, that's really cool. Imagine that. And I met people from the medical school, and I met people from arts and sciences and from Fletcher and all these different places. I said, well, this could be a place I could find some comfort. Enhance capacity of primary and secondary schools. I don't know how good a job we've done with that, but we've done some of that. Broaden service and outreach nationally and internationally. I mean, Tufts, one of the great things about Tufts is its, and we're in the space that epitomizes that, is its social outreach. We have had that long before this was conceived of, and it continues to this day. Tufts students, undergraduates, and graduate students are far more engaged in the society around them, in social organizations, going into public service. I gave a talk at the EPA Region 1 in Boston this summer. I don't know how many people came up to me as Tufts graduates who work at the Environmental Protection Agency or at the state government. Every place that you go, you find Tufts graduates working to protect the environment, improve social well-being, improve planning and all the rest of it, and maintain the movement. So they created a secretariat, which for a while lodged here, but then it was moved. So whose idea was this? Whose idea was this? Well, there he is, Tony Cortese. He was a Tufts alumnus, an engineer. He had been both the Commissioner of the Environment in Massachusetts. He had a PhD in public health, and was those of us, I see the faces around here in recognition, a dynamo, did not slow down for a moment, always spinning off new ideas, and he actually was the environmental dean. We had a dean of the environment at Tufts at this time, and Tony was it. And so who implemented it? Well, he was working with Jean Mayer. Jean Mayer was open to new ideas. When Jean Mayer came in, Tufts was broke financially. It was in real trouble. And he did outrageous things like create a veterinary school and a school of nutrition and really develop a European presence and did all kinds of things. Some of the trustees were not that happy with, but it turned Tufts around in an amazing way so that not only was able to do those additional things and build on the strengths that it had, but to grow into new areas and to expand in new ways. And so that was a collaboration that really made a lot of difference. So what else is at Tufts? Well, if you go back in 1973, Herman Field, a prominent planner, he looked a little younger when it was 1973, this was a picture of his later years, developed a program in the Department of Political Science that was about urban planning. In 1980, it became a department, the Urban Environmental Policy Planning, now Department of Environmental Planning, Policy and Planning. I always get, I stumble over that because it wasn't that when I came here. And so UEP has been around for a very long time, long before people were really talking much about the environment. This woman is an amazing person. Nancy Anderson. She lived in a little house down across from what's now the Meyer Center. Actually, I think it's where where Gordon Hall, Sophia Gordon Hall is. They tore down her house afterwards and built Sophia Gordon Hall, which is appropriate to build a hall like that on Nancy Anderson's sacred ground. This woman, so she was called Director of Environmental Affairs and Senior Fellow at LFC and a Research Associate at the Fletcher School. And in fact, when I found this photo, it was under the Fletcher School. Amazing, interesting. So in 1979, she founded the New England Environmental Network, which was an educational program to educate people who are going to serve on conservation commissions in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has an amazing citizen board kind of governance structure in our cities and towns. And she ran these programs to educate them. And various of us would get called in to give talks at various times and so forth. And she also organized these massive, I mean really massive, like 800 or 1,000 people would come. 1,500 at the peak. 1,500 at the peak. These Tufts environmental, New England environmental conferences. And she'd bring in the Secretary of the Interior. And she would call him up and he would say, but I have a cabinet meeting that day. And Nancy said, I want you here. And he was here. It was absolutely amazing. When Nancy called, there was never hello, no small talk. Bill, here's what I want you to do. That's how it came out of the phone. And you did it. You did it. And it made enormous difference. She was really quite an extraordinary person. Environmental studies program started in 1984, as I was able to track down. Norton Nickerson, a professor of biology, started it all on his lonesome, and I think he was the sole practitioner for a number of years. But look at the legacy of that. You know, by starting out with something that was improbable and people said it'll never work, and as long as you keep it to biology, it's okay. You know, all those kinds of things must have happened. And he started that, and that was in '84. In the same year, something called the Center for Environmental Management was started. It was put together. I think Jean Meyer had a lot of clout in Washington, and he was able to get EPA to fund it. It was, when I got here, it was about a $3 million a year operation. Had 22 researchers, paid researchers on staff, some of them in this room right now. And it was tasked with doing environmental research and outreach. And that's what it did. Wrote reports, did all kinds of interesting things. So many faculty got their start here, either at CEM or financed by CEM. I mean, David Walt, who's now a university professor for the great inventions he created, those were funded initially by the Center for Environmental Management. It's just amazing the number of faculty who got started here in one way or another, either directly or indirectly. So back to Tony Cortese. Tony said, look, if we're going to do the Talloires Declaration, we've got to get our own house in order. There are a lot of faculty here who ought to be teaching environmental courses, and they're not doing it. He did his instance survey technique and concluded it was because they didn't feel comfortable doing it. What am I going to do in history? What am I going to do in mathematics? What am I going to do at the medical school? What am I going to do here, there, and the other place? So he invented the Tufts Environmental Literacy Institute, TELI. And we held the first session in 1990. And it was held for faculty from all the schools at Tufts. We must have had 30 or 40 people there that year. And there were two things. One, you had to agree that you would incorporate something about the environment into at least one course when you went back to your department or school. Okay. Well, it's interesting that a later study showed that, in fact, people did that. Very high percentage of them did it. And that they continued to do it for years and years and years afterwards, and to expand it. Some changed 4 whole courses in order to meet their condition. It was funded by EPA and a company called Allied Signal, a chemical company that doesn't exist anymore. Tom Hellman was the contact person who had been a student in the first thermodynamics course I ever taught at Williams College. That was a pure coincidence. But it was useful. It was useful for the next few years as they continued to fund it. It was considered so innovative that it was recognized by President George Herbert Walker Bush in a ceremony in the Rose Garden at the White House. And I'll never forget the takeoff from here. There was a helicopter, I kid you not, and Jean Mayer and Tony climbed into it, and off it took. You were there, weren't you, Sarah? Do you remember that? Oh, it was, I'd only been here about a year. I was in disbelief that all this sort of thing was going on. I wasn't sure how environmentally sound a helicopter was, but that was beside the point. Anyway, major curricular innovations occurred across the campus. And bring it up to date, in 2013, the subject wasn't climate change or something, it was One Health. And they had people from 10 countries or something, plus a group of new faculty. Ansha, you can fill in this better than I can. Actually, I attended that one for a while. And here you can see this very international group. Now, international groups were not anything unusual, as you'll see, that we did a lot of things internationally. For example, we had this link to Mendeleev University in Moscow. And Professor Marty Sherman of the history department was actually our connection there because he did Russian history. In fact, he won a Pulitzer Prize for a book that he wrote on Russia, maybe 10 years ago or so. In 1990, we did this precedent-breaking thing where we had a space bridge. Now today, you just do it on Skype. $50,000 for 1 hour of a video link. There were only something like 2 satellites that you could bounce things off of, and they had to be in the right configuration, and the right time of day and night between Moscow and here, and it was quite something. But it actually worked, and we could see the Moscow students, and they could see us, and we engaged with them. The organizer on that end, Natalia Tarasova, is still a colleague of mine to this day. And whenever we are in an international situation, she says, I met Bill in space. So these things have a way of doing all kinds of good things. So this was followed by a student exchange. And so Fletcher, all Tufts students got to go to Moscow, and Moscow students got to come here. And you were one of them? Oh, Sarah Creighton was one of them. That's really exciting. I'd forgotten that part. Now, in 1991, the Fletcher School of International, Law and Diplomacy didn't have any environmental programs. And Arpad von Lazar, a Hungarian-born character, to say the least, a professor of international policy, decided he would try to teach one, and he found it was rather difficult, apparently. I had come in to be the director of the Center for Environmental Management and teamed up with Rick Wetzler to offer a course in global environmental policy, because I had just come from being the director of the climate program at the World Resources Institute in Washington. And so we gave this course. Well, students poured into it because it was really a hot, interesting new topic. And so the students at Fletcher started pushing. They needed somebody. So they hired Judy Kildow from MIT. And she came and taught for a year. And students said, we want somebody permanent. We want this to go on. And so they did a search. And I got picked to do it. So that was, for me, a great opportunity to be in the right place at the right time. So that changed things at the Fletcher School. Environmental programs today, I felt so badly putting this up because I'm sure I'm leaving something important out. So please don't be offended if don't see yourself up here. But obviously, environmental studies at A&S, now chaired by culinarians, UEP, I guess, civil environmental engineering. That was here, but it wasn't really called that at the time, I don't believe. Chemical and biological engineering has all kinds of environmental programs within it. Center for International Environment Resource Policy at Fletcher. Agriculture, food, and environment over at the School of Nutrition. And that's really going strong. And many of you have interactions with the students from there. They come over to this campus and our students go over there because it's really a terrific program. The Center for Conservation Medicine out at Cummings at the vet school. And one of the favorite things I got to do while being here was being invited out to the vet school, because going to Grafton is just a treat. It's such a fabulous place. And I really enjoyed my colleagues out there, and to discover that there were elephant vets and gorilla vets and a shrimp vet, right? In addition to dogs and cats and horses and cows. I mean, it's amazing to me what was out there, and I had to develop really close relationships with a number of my colleagues out there. We shared a master's thesis on white spot virus in shrimp. And the person who did that, Caleb McLennan, went with the vet to Ecuador. She was Ecuadorian, and actually did field research and came back and explained what it was all about and how Ecuador's export value went from $9 billion one year to $1 billion the next because of this disease. So somebody says, why do you need a shrimp vet? Well, when one shrimp sneezes, everybody gets influenza and you lose the whole thing. So it's really important. So water system science and society, water diplomacy, the IGRIT program, there's just a whole slew of things that have grown over time. We have these institutes of sustainability. We have the Global Development Environment Institute, which was founded around 1990. Neva Goodwin came and from BU and said, I want to put up just a research institute that will deal with economics in a new way. And so she and I became the co-directors of that, although she's really the person who conceived it and did all the work. I just sort of was the conduit to the rest of the university and so forth. And we gave her a place over at the Center for Environmental Management, and then she gradually got different places. And actually, I have a little office down there now that I'm retired from Fletcher. And they have amazing productivity of books and journal articles and reports and things. The Tufts Institute of the Environment. This actually grew out of something earlier. The faculty began saying, you know, we really need a forum in which to connect with one another. And so we did one kind of an organization, and that was so-so for a while. And I had asked to chair it. I was asked to chair it, and President DiBiagio, out of his discretionary budget, gave me $25,000 a year to coordinate all the environmental programs on the campus. And we were just outgrowing that. By the way, that was half of his discretionary budget. This is how poor Tufts was at one time. Everything he could spend, he gave me half of it, which is very generous of him. So I spoke with him one day, and he said, well, why don't you come to the deans and provosts meeting and talk about this? And so I went in and I just said, you know, this is, you know, it's great. Look at all these great things we're doing. But $25,000, I hate to come in begging for money, but, you know, could we do 50 maybe or something like that? And it shouldn't come out of the president's discretionary fund. And the dean of the medical school spoke up and said, Bill, you don't need $50,000. You need at least $100,000. And I said, I do. Yes, I do. I was so stunned. I almost blew it right there. And I walked out of there with a pledge from the deans to spend $100,000 if I would create a new organization that would be more robust than the one we had. So that's how TIE got born. That was the birth of TIE. I still remember walking out of Ballou Hall back to my office with my ears ringing, I thought I was dizzy. I literally was dizzy. I could not believe what had just happened. And then on campus, we have the Stockholm Environment Institute, which is really more of an affiliative arrangement, but there's a very prominent European developed, obviously, Stockholm Environment Institute, which was formed shortly after Rio, or maybe at the time of Rio. And they have had offices in Stockholm. Now they've spread out all across the world. And their model about 10 years ago changed to wanting to affiliate with universities. And they came and talked to Tufts. They thought we would be the best place, better than some of those other institutions downhill and down the river. So that was really very nice to be recognized in that way. Then we did innovative programs. We had this program with the United Nations Environment Program that Rick Wetzler directed for a while. And we had really interesting people. We had Nay Tun, this Burmese former head of UNEP or the UN programs in Southeast Asia, was there for a while. By the way, I ran into him recently in Washington just at a meeting, and he's now at Stony Brook. And still, you know, same soft-spoken, you know, you have to really lean over to hear what they are saying, but he's so profound, wonderful. We created the Tufts Climate Initiative, and that was in 1999, and that was an interesting process because, needless to say, the people at facilities weren't necessarily so keen on this, and the provost was very skeptical, very, very skeptical. But we worked it through and we laid it all out, and the goal was to meet or beat the Kyoto goals, which was a 7% reduction of our emissions below 1990 levels by 2012. So it took about 6 months of working the whole system, and we were ready to go in and present this to President DiBiagio. Saul Gittleman was provost. So we're sitting in the outer room there, and Saul says, "Now, Bill, what is the year by which we have to do this?" I said, 2012. He said, "Oh, that's fine." He was going to retire before then. So we went in and we sold it to the president. He said, "It's a great idea. Let's do it." And we did. And we not only succeeded, we exceeded the goals by a substantial amount. So we were the first university probably in the country, maybe in the world, to actually have a climate goal. And it was really quite exciting to see what it did. It really, Betsy Eisenstein, who's here from facilities, and the energy director may not think it was so exciting, or maybe it was too exciting, I don't know, maybe scary even, but anyway, we did amazing things. We were the only university to join the Chicago Climate Exchange, which was a brokerage system whereby they had a system of a very rigorous system of how to account for your emissions. And that put a big burden actually on Betsy and on Sarah and on a whole bunch of other people. And so, you know, I was guilty of talking the president into this. But anyhow, we did that. But and we could sell any surplus that we had on the market, or if we didn't meet it, we had to buy on that market. Well, it lasted about 10 years, and then it folded just a few years ago. But it was an interesting experiment in market-based mechanisms for addressing climate change. I can't remember how this partnership with Toyota came about. I think I was, as the director of TIE, I got a call from somebody at Toyota asking if he could come and talk to us. And maybe it was because we had the climate initiative, maybe, and all these other things. And he said, well, you know, we're coming out with this new hybrid car called the Prius. And I think they gave it to us at half price or something, Sarah? Oh, that's right. They gave us 4 electric RAV4 cars just to use for several years for free. And they were really sort of pleased that we had it. And you can see what we did to it. We gave it to facilities, and they put this great logo on the hood. And on the back it said, what did it say? It had something. Operation still on the road. It's still going strong? Oh my goodness, that's amazing. Well, yeah, sure.
Really give it to the police said it wouldn't be durable enough. So we gave it to the police, and they were psyched because it had AM, FM radio. By policy, they were only allowed to buy radios that had AM radio.
I see. See, it's these little things that make the difference. You know, it's not the great policy picture. It's these little things like, oh, we get FM, right? That means we can get country and western when we want it or something. I don't know. That's probably more likely to be on AM, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so we got this thing, and there were all kinds of jokes around town because Tufts was the only university in the area that had one, and there were jokes that we heard that Harvard was sort of annoyed they didn't have one and so forth. And we used to joke and say that, you know, Harvard had Tufts Prius envy, right? So we enjoyed having this and still enjoy having it. That's good. So this was a partnership, and I left out of here the other one, which is maybe because of this, when Zipcar was founded, Tufts was one of the first places to have Zipcars on campus. All right, so we were just kind of rolling along out at the front and working with companies and doing all kinds of fun things. When President George Bush came in, and we knew he was sort of hostile to the climate issue, President DiBiagio got together some 25 or so presidents of colleges and universities and wrote to him and said, we'd like to work together and work with you to develop energy systems that would address climate change. We never got a reply, but we did manage to get 25 university presidents to sign on to that. And then the Office of Sustainability, which was founded by Sarah Hammond Creighton, who's sitting right here, and she worked with Betsy Eisenstein, who's sitting right next to her, in order to implement all of these wild and crazy things that we, faculty and others, were inflicting on the university by the month. And they did a wonderful job. And today, Tina, of course, heads the Sustainability Office, so we still have that. So these institutions have endured, which I'm very pleased to see. We instructed others at other universities on what we had done and how to do it. Anne Rappaport, who many of you know, and Sarah Creighton wrote this book, Degrees That Matter. What a clever title for a book on climate change in universities, right? Degrees That Matter. Boy, that I don't know who thought of that, Sarah, but it was really brilliant. It was published by MIT Press, not shabby there, meaning that it had a lot of technical qualities to it that were very, very good, and it was very favorably reviewed in the journal Nature, which is one of the most prestigious journals in science. So, Degrees That Matter. So now we're back. Governments are in Paris trying to figure out what to do about climate change. They should read this book, right? Not only is it about what universities can do, it really is a lot about what all of us can do. It has enormous amount of wisdom embedded in it. So where does the Talloires Declaration stand today? Well, Tufts maintained the Secretariat for a while, and then just decided that they just couldn't keep up with it because all these other universities wanted to sign on, and that took you'd have to hire somebody sort of full-time to manage this thing. And so they handed it over to a foundation, which is called the Association of University Leaders for a Sustainable Future, which I think is based in Washington, D.C. Is that right? I can't remember where it is, somewhere. Where? In Boston? Oh, in Waltham. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so it's moved around a bit. All right, but anyway, there have been 5 additional meetings by other groups calling for basically the same kinds of things, upgrading it over the years. And so as I say, the Secretariat passed on, but they're now over 400, last look I got on the website, 430 universities from 40 countries who are members, who signed saying they want to do what's on that piece of paper. And about half of them are from developing countries. So, and former East Bloc countries. And the other half are from Europe and North America and Australia and other places. That's pretty amazing. It'd be wonderful to get all 430 together in a room somewhere and say, okay, what have you done lately? And what are you going to do in the future? Okay. So now, let me just close with something that doesn't make me quite so happy, but which suggests a direction we can go. So where does Tufts stand today? In the 1990s and 2000s, we were absolutely the leader. I would go across the country and people would say, oh, Tufts, you're the green university, you're doing all these things. Today, we're ranked 86th in the Sierra Club Cool Schools 2015 survey. Now, that's better than being 156th, which is as far down as they go, but so we're kind of halfway up the line. And there are places that have really gone very, very heavily into sustainability, whether it's new buildings or whatever it is. Of course, they haven't heard about our new combined heat and power plant that's being built out here, and they haven't heard about a lot of things, and we may not have actually promoted ourselves well enough. I think we're a lot better than 86th, but that's where we're ranked, and that's what people see. And so we should recapture our position at the top, and I think we can do so. I think we have all the qualities necessary. I mean, academically, we have the programs, we have all kinds of things. And at this point, for those who have passed us, we can learn from them. After all, they learned from us in the beginning. We can piggyback on what they've done since. And so I just like to leave you on an optimistic note, which is, I think that what was the vision going all the way back to the 1970s at Tufts was really prophetic. It really headed Tufts in a direction that no one at the time thought was anything worth doing. I remember when we started the program at Williams, when I was teaching there, and members of certain departments would say, oh, it's just a fad. It's just a fad. Well, if it's a fad, it's an enduring fad. And I would go back to them and I'd say, well, you know, I sort of think this economics thing is kind of a fad too. I mean, what can you do? What can you say? You got to say something. So anyway, this is really, I think, it's such a profound, it's so profound to deal with the very basic system that keeps us all going, that we are all dependent upon. And as governments struggle in Paris, what is happening in Paris, what the governments do is probably less than half of what could possibly happen. They're not going to reach their 2-degree goal, or they're not going to stay within the 2 degrees with what they're going to put on the table, what they're going to finally agree to. I think the small island nations will disappear. I think that's already cooked in. But that's a tragedy. But we'll try to, we need to make good on that. After all, we've caused it. But what is really happening there is not at the national levels, but at the regions and cities groups, led by Jerry Brown, for example, from California, the governor of California, which is committed to doubling the renewable energy, you know, or having half of all electricity in California be renewable energy by 2030. Doubling the efficiency of every building in California by 2030. Andrew Cuomo has pushed for the same thing in New York State. That's pretty good. We have every major technology company committed to 100% renewable energy. 88 major corporations just signed an agreement in Paris that they are committed to either reducing their emissions totally by 80 to 100%. By 20, but they don't, not all of them give a date or the same date, but 2050 is the ultimate date, and guarantee they will do 100% renewable energy. Apple, Google, Microsoft, all of them. Walmart. Come on, universities can be better than Walmart. I'm glad Walmart's doing it, but come on, we can do better than that. So that's happening. Bill Gates and his billionaire buddies have committed $2 billion in the first year to work with 20 country governments, which include China and India, the US, Germany, a bunch of other countries, to improve the technologies that will give us zero carbon energy. So there's a lot happening that's not on the table in Paris. We call it the Paris dividend because it's something Paris plus. It's more than governments are counting on. And it's a good thing because they're shooting kind of low. But they will get an agreement and every country has agreed to be part of it. That's a huge breakthrough from a diplomatic point of view. So I think we can begin helping here. We can look and see what's happening elsewhere in the world. By the way, in Europe, by 2019, every building must be a zero net energy building like the house that I built 8 years ago. Every single building. By 2017, it will be every public building. By 2019, it will be every building that's built. So the world is moving on. They're moving forward, and we need to be at the vanguard. Thank you very much for having me. I'm open for questions or comments. We have a few minutes, I think. Yes.
Could I just ask you, how do we get back to the top again?
Okay, the question is, how do we get back on top again? Okay, it has to be, obviously it has to be become a priority. It has to be, I think one of the things is to, first of all, look around and see, you know, what we've done, which is good. I mean, there's no question about it. We've done some terrific things. We did them before a lot of other people did them. But now, among other things, the technology is better than it was when we started. The opportunities are greater than when we started. But it takes analysis. And what's a university for if it's not to analyze and measure and figure out where to go. When I got here, I used to say to Tony Cortese, he said, where should we start? I said, put on a blindfold, spin around and point. Doesn't matter. You know, whatever you point to will be something that needs doing. And that was basically right. So we did not spend 2 years doing a full inventory before we ever did anything. Right? One of the things I worry about the Bill Gates initiative is they'll say, oh, we're still researching it, so there's no point in buying a new solar panel because there'll be a better one along in several years with Bill Gates footing the bill. No, you can't do that. We've got to go with what's there. And we have plenty of technology now that can get us there. There's no question about it. Buildings. If we learned anything, buildings, it's how much energy you don't have to supply that is more important than how you supply what you do supply. Right? So walls that are, you know, these glass buildings, those are a disaster from an environmental point of view, from an energy point of view. They're even more of a disaster when they're built on the equator. You know, the 2 towers, the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, require an entire power plant the size of one to serve the city of Syracuse, New York, just for 2 buildings because they are glass boxes on the equator. This is just nuts. So we need to avoid those kind of problems, and we're building some new buildings. And I hope they're really. I know effort went into making sure that they sent out the RFP that looked pretty good. I assume you had something to do with that. I thought that looked very good, but we just need to get started and not. Let's. I hate to say form a committee because that's something that universities are very good at, but let's form a strategy for moving forward. Yes, Tina.
I just want to say that, so the school ranking comes from STARS. They pull it directly from the Continually Tracking Systems and Rating Systems. We just actually recently did it again, and it includes both government and like social sustainability things as well as academics. And one of the places where it Tufts is like has practically no points is the academics, in that we don't have a requirement. We don't have the percentage of courses that include sustainability is very small, and part of that is because we have all these special schools like the medical schools, and all of this stuff. So that is one of the places that Tufts could really improve.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have anything to do with schools.
Yes. Okay. Saying that one of the reasons we rank low in the Sierra Club rankings is because by their definition, we don't have as much in our curriculum as other institutions have. Anji, you want to say something about that?
Along the same lines, actually, I have a question for you. Some industry organization and companies came out just 2 weeks ago saying that they don't think that young people have the skills and the knowledge to do what it takes to change our economic system. And so my question to you is, do you have some ideas about what to improve into curriculum that we as universities could make sure our students know so they can deal with the future?
That's a really, the question was, there are those who say that people coming out of college today don't have the skills and the capacities to make the changes that are necessary to address these kinds of problems. I think that there are 2 ways to think about what an education is. One is you teach the world the way it is, and then the other is you teach people to make judgments about it and figure out if those judgments say this isn't the best way to do it, how do you change it? I mean, law schools and business schools are notorious for teaching people how to best the system. You know, I mean, stories I hear from business schools, students who've been to business school is that it's really pretty bad. You know, here's a whole course on how to get around environmental regulations, basically, right? That's not what I have in mind when I talk about this. What I'm talking about is how do we deal with the rules that are actually getting in the way of things. I mean, right now, here's a crisis right here in Massachusetts, attempts to undo rooftop solar electricity in the state, Massachusetts. Why? Because the utilities want to rely on central power stations. And in 2013, the Edison Electric Institute wrote a report And the line that I love from it is, rooftop solar is a threat to our business model. Rooftop solar is not yet up to 1% in the United States as a whole. It's already a threat, and it is a threat. Look what happens on a sunny July afternoon when everybody's turning on air conditioners, the sun's at its brightest. It used to be that the utility would have to pay 10, 20, even 100 times for 15 minutes or 30 minutes when the demand soars of the going rate. So instead of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, it could be $1, it could be $10 a kilowatt hour. They got all that as profit. Now, with these just less than 1% solar panels on rooftops, that peak is shaved, and therefore that's not there anymore. They are unhappy about that. It is a threat to their business model, which is basically taking advantage of these peaks. It's also a benefit to every user, obviously. If I put solar panels on my house and you don't, you get the benefit of it in lower net rates for the next year. So then they're saying, well, it's unfair for people to get any kind of a benefit. I mean, I'm hooked to the grid. I use about 2/3 of the electricity I generate directly. I export about 1/3, and I import another 1/3 in the winter time and at night when I don't generate anything, don't generate much. That means they don't have to have the transmission system as big. They don't have to have the distribution system as big. Oh, but they get paid by how many wires they have out there, whether they're useful or not. So we have a system with terrible, terrible incentives. So teaching students how to ferret these things out would really be useful. Others, questions? Yes.
I'm just curious. You mentioned the housing initiative in Europe.
Yes.
Do you know if that's through the European Union framework?
Yes. It's an EU directive. You can go online and find it. It's really pretty stunning. I was over there and people told me about this, and I said, well, that's pretty amazing. But that's what they're claiming now. I mean, I have no idea how each country is implementing it, but it's clearly an important shift. Yes.
Sorry, I was talking to Spanish and correctly when I was reading about it. I would like to ask a question.
Surely.
So there's this whole talk about countries fighting it out on the question. You decrease by 50%, and 40%, it's a whole wrestling match.
Yes.
Don't you think the debate should shift towards a paradigm where because it's a global problem, where you account for carbon footprints per citizen, per global citizen, and countries work in a direction where they reduce their carbon footprint per citizen rather than all emissions.
Yep. All right. So the question for those of you who are watching this as a webinar is shouldn't we use emissions per capita instead of countrywide emissions? Because under the current system, China is first, double the United States. By the way, China's emissions now per capita are up and ahead of the European ones. That's pretty amazing, since there's still 300 million Chinese who have no access to fossil fuels at all. But as someone said, when you have a lot of capitas, numbers add up. So basically, that's an argument that's been made. India, by the way, is third in total emissions. U.S. is still first in accumulated emissions, which is actually what really counts, not what annual emissions. It's the cumulative over our whole history.
Second in per capita.
What?
Second in per capita.
Yes, we're first in total, right? That's right. But second in per capita. All right. So these are the things that are out there is how things might be done. Now, Shivan Kartha at the Stockholm Environment Institute has an interesting answer to that. He says, yes, that's right. But it should not be by country. It should be by economic class regardless, should be by income class regardless of what country they're in. So that means that rich Indians, rich Chinese, rich Americans, rich Brits, whoever it is, basically they are in the heavy category, and the poor Indians and the poor Americans and the poor everybody else are in a different category. those people in the poor category shouldn't have to reduce necessarily in the same amount that those in the rich category. Now, there's no way on earth I can see to implement that, but conceptually, it's a really interesting idea that basically if people have a lot of money and they spend it on blowing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, they ought to be responsible for it regardless of what country they live in. Be hard to put in place, but it's an interesting way to get people to think about it more carefully, I think. Yes, Rick. Yes.
I was thinking, coming from WRI here, you have a unique perspective on the relationship between NGOs, especially academic think tanks that are also NGOs, and the university. And do you see this wall becoming more permeable? You talked initially about academic silos between departments, but it would seem to me NGOs would be even further afield, although perhaps not things like the Stockholm Environment Institute or Ozone Research Center. Do you see going forward that we're going to suddenly have an environmental defense fellow like Kristen does, or Nature Conservancy collaboration like Stanford does?
I think the question is should we have tighter alliances with some of the NGOs that are out there doing real analysis, real work on these sorts of things? And I would say yes. I mean, we do have Stockholm Environment Institute here as a piece embedded in the university. And you mentioned that some of the universities have fellows. By the way, Union of Concerned Scientists is considering having academic fellows go there. So it would be a two-way transit. I just returned a month ago from London, where I was invited to go by NRDC and a group of European NGOs, because it turns out that the Europeans, I was absolutely stunned by this. You know how the UK is, they're gonna be out of coal by 2025. Without any intervention, they would have been down to 1% of their electricity coming from coal in 2025. So it's not as big a deal as it sounds, but it's a good idea. Put the nail through the heart right there. Just say no more. What are they replacing it with? They're replacing it with biofuels. That is, burning trees to make electricity. Where are the trees coming from? They're coming from North Carolina. They're being deforested. The whole eastern part of North Carolina is being deforested. The trees are being chopped up, turned into pellets, shipped across the ocean in specially built ships, burned in the UK in about a minute, or 10 minutes, or 5 minutes, or whatever it is, counted as zero by definition in terms of carbon. Zero by definition. And in fact, the whole EU counts biomass and biofuels as zero by definition. The fires in Indonesia in 2 months put out as much carbon dioxide as the entire US economy does in a year. Why were they burning? Because of increased demand for biodiesel that comes from palm oil by the EU. Is the EU counting those as their emissions? Apparently not. And I was told by an official in the British government, after I pointed this out, that in fact it is not zero. The emissions are greater than burning coal. That's kind of a shocking thing to learn when you're making electricity. And she said, well, you know, if we don't count it as zero, we can't meet our obligation under the EU rules.
Well, let's take
That's what,
once again for a play talk.
Thank you all for having me.